The doing has been the strategy. For most people who have loved an avoidant, the primary response to the insufficiency of what was being returned was the escalation of what was being offered. Do more. Be more present. Be more understanding. Be more patient. Demonstrate through the accumulation of actions, the gestures, the accommodations, the continuous, generous, increasingly exhausting extension of effort in the direction of someone who was not meeting the effort with equivalent effort, that the connection is worth preserving and that you are worth staying for. The doing is understandable. It is the natural response of someone who cares deeply and has been taught, through the ordinary socialization of most cultures, that love is demonstrated through action, that the quality of what you offer is legible in what you do, that effort is the currency of genuine caring, and the accumulation of effort is the accumulation of evidence that you are genuinely invested. The avoidant receives the doing differently, not because they are ungrateful or incapable of appreciation, because the doing, however generous and however genuinely motivated, arrives through the management protocol as something other than what it is. The doing that is organized around the avoidance response, around demonstrating worth, around producing a particular reaction, around building the case for continued engagement, arrives through the monitoring system as intimacy pressure in action form, as the behavioral expression of an investment that the avoidance system needs to manage against, as evidence not of the quality of what you are, but of the degree to which the avoidance response to you has become the organizing principle of your behavior. The doing in this configuration confirms the management protocol's assessment, and the management protocol manages against it with the same efficiency it brings to every other form of intimacy pressure, through the creation of the distance that keeps the pressure at the level the avoidance system can sustain. The one thing the avoidant values is not done. It cannot be done. It cannot be produced through effort or demonstrated through action or accumulated through the patient, generous extension of what the doing represents. It is witnessed. Specifically, the quality of being genuinely, non-performatively, entirely actually yourself in the avoidance presence. Not yourself in the curated, presented, this is the version most likely to be well received sense. Not yourself in the adjusted, avoidant, accommodating, needs, softened, and expression moderated sense. The actual self, the one that exists in the absence of the audience. The one whose opinions do not shift to accommodate the room, the one whose needs are real and are expressed as real without the prior calculation of whether the expression serves the desired relational outcome, the one who is, in every interaction, recognizably and irreducibly the same person, regardless of whether the avoidant is warm or cold, present or distant, engaging or retreating. This is what the avoidant values, not because it is the clever relational strategy, not because the withholding of the self produces a desired effect through the mechanism of scarcity, but because the quality of being genuinely, consistently yourself is the only quality that the monitoring system cannot read as intimacy pressure. The monitoring system's function, as examined throughout these pieces, is the assessment of the other person's orientation toward the avoidant. It is running continuously below the level of conscious awareness, processing the inputs of every interaction for the specific signal it was designed to detect. Another person's emotional state organized around the avoidance response. Another person's behavior calibrated to produce a particular outcome in the avoidant. Another person's selfhood, however genuine its underlying qualities, being presented through the filter of what will be most effective with this specific audience. The doing is almost always filtered in this way, because the doing, by its nature, is directed. It is aimed at the avoidant. It is shaped by the implicit or explicit goal of producing a specific response. The gesture is a gesture toward the avoidant. The accommodation is an accommodation of the avoidant. The patience is patience with the avoidant. However genuine the underlying quality of the person doing these things, the doing itself is organized around the avoidant as its reference point, and the monitoring system reads the organization rather than the underlying quality. The genuine self is not organized around the avoidant as its reference point. It simply is. It exists with its qualities and its opinions and its needs and its way of being in the world, independently of whether the avoidant is present to observe it or how the avoidant will receive it. It does not shift configuration based on the avoidant's response because its configuration is determined by its own interior rather than by the audience in front of it. This is what the monitoring system cannot read as intimacy pressure, because it is not organized around the avoidant. It is not reaching toward the avoidant. It is not performing for the avoidant. It is simply, constitutionally, entirely genuinely there, with the specific, rare, profoundly disarming quality of something that does not require anything from the avoidant in order to be what it is. The value the avoidant places on this quality is not merely the preference of someone who finds self-possessed people aesthetically appealing or relationally convenient. It runs deeper than preference. It runs to the level of the most fundamental unmet need in the avoidant's relational history. The avoidant grew up in an attachment environment in which other people's emotional states were organized around the avoidant's behavior, or in which the avoidant's behavior was required to organize itself around the emotional states of the people around them. Either configuration produced the same result. The avoidant learned that other people's interior states and their own were not separate things, that what they did produced what others felt, that what others felt produced what was required of them, that the space between people was not a genuine space, a space in which two separate, internally governed beings existed and met, but a continuous feedback loop in which the interior states of each person were constantly being shaped by the interior states of the other. This learning produced the management protocol, the continuous monitoring of the other person's emotional state, the assessment of what the other person's state required of the avoidant, the management of the avoidant's own engagement to prevent the other person's state from generating requirements that exceeded the avoidant's current capacity. The person who is genuinely, constitutionally themselves, whose interior state is generated from within rather than shaped by the avoidant's behavior, interrupts this learning at its foundation. They do not require management because their state is not organized around the avoidant's behavior. They do not produce the feedback loop because their interior is self-governing rather than avoidant responsive. They exist in the avoidant's relational world as something entirely novel, a person whose presence does not generate the continuous requirement of management. What this person provides is not closeness in the conventional sense, not the warm, embracing, explicitly caring closeness that the doing was attempting to provide. What this person provides is something the avoidant values more deeply and finds more rarely: respite. The specific, genuine, neurologically real respite of a nervous system that has been running the monitoring protocol continuously for decades, encountering, for the duration of the interaction with this person, nothing that requires monitoring, no input that activates the assessment, no emotional weather that requires management, no organized around me quality in the other person's presence that generates the feedback loop the avoidant has been managing against since before they had the language to name what they were managing. The respite is not nothing. For someone whose relational life has been an unbroken series of interactions requiring the continuous allocation of significant resources to the management protocol, the encounter with someone who produces no monitoring requirement is one of the most significant relational experiences available. It is the closest thing to rest that the avoidant's relational life has offered. And the association that forms between this person and this experience of rest is not a casual preference. It is the bonding of someone who has been, for a very long time, in the specific exhaustion of someone who never rests, encountering in one specific person the first genuine rest. The doing cannot produce this. The doing is, by its organized toward the avoidant nature, always activating the monitoring at some level, always generating some degree of the feedback loop, always arriving as the intimacy pressure whose management is the management protocol's primary function. The being, the genuine, self-governed, monitoring nothing, needing nothing from the avoidant quality of someone who is simply and fully themselves, produces the respite. produces the disarmament, produces the bonding that attaches the avoidant to this person, not through the weight of obligation generated by significant doing, but through the specific, unforced, deeply genuine draw of someone in whose presence the most chronic and most fundamental exhaustion of the avoidant's interior life finally, briefly stops. Stop doing more, not because the doing is wrong, not because generosity and effort are not genuine expressions of love. They are real, they are valuable, they are, in a relationship between two people with the mutual capacity for genuine reciprocity, among the most important things love does. But with the avoidant, the doing produces the management, reliably, by the nature of what the doing is, directed, organized, avoidant responsive, rather than by any deficiency in the quality of what is being done. Stop doing more, be more. The full, unmodified, internally governed, entirely genuine version of who you actually are, in every interaction, regardless of the avoidant's temperature, regardless of whether the being is being received with the warmth it deserves, regardless of the outcome the being does or does not produce in the avoidant's exterior behavior. Simply be fully, without the filter of what the avoidant needs you to be, without the direction of what the doing was trying to accomplish, without the organization around the avoidant that the monitoring system reads as the intimacy pressure it needs to manage against. Just be. And discover what the avoidant, whose monitoring system is currently finding nothing to monitor, whose management protocol is currently running against nothing, whose most fundamental relational exhaustion is currently in the specific presence of someone who is genuinely, fully, unperformatively themselves, is finally, for the first time in as long as they can remember, actually able to feel